In at number 10, Chitlock. This character is a very strange one that appeared in Sensational Spider-Man Volume 1 Issue 13 in 1997, and technically was more of an opponent of the Hulk's than Spidey's. It is a 25-foot tall half-chicken, half-cow creature that lives in Antarctica, just outside of the Savage Land. It used to be worshipped a millennia ago, but went into hibernation. After a hole in the ozone layer caused the ice around the Savage Land to melt, it woke up and somehow got to Monster Island, where it fought the Hulk. Spider-Man, along with several other heroes on a SHIELD-sponsored mission, are entangled in all of this after they discovered that Roxxon oil was behind the ice melting faster, and releasing the likes of Chitlock and other creatures, including our next number. In at number 9, Stegron. Compared to that half-chicken, half-cow abomination, Stegron has had more longevity in Marvel Comics, funny enough. He is also known as the Dinosaur Man, a dude named Vincent Stegron who was hired by SHIELD to study the DNA of dinosaurs from the Savage Land. Inspired by the experiment that turned his colleague Dr. Kirk Connors into the Lizard, Stegron attempted a similar experiment but with some stolen dino DNA, which then turned him into a semi-humanoid Stegosaurus-like creature. He could command dinosaurs, which is actually pretty cool, and tried to overrun NYC with dinosaur buddies from the Savage Land that Spider-Man and friends had to help stop. During the encounter that we mentioned in our previous number, he actually ended up aiding Spider-Man rather than fighting the hero, when he realized that they were trying to save his home of the Savage Land. We're all in this together. And at number 8, Typeface. Typeface, aka Gordon Thomas, first appeared in Peter Parker's Spider-Man Volume 2, Issue 23 in 2000. Thomas fought in the Vietnam War, a war that took the life of his brother Joey. When he returned to the US, he was not the same. His wife left him and took their son with her. Gordon kept on living, becoming a signsmith until he was laid off. That was the straw that broke Gordon's back though. He decided he would become a supervillain, taking on the name Typeface, and using a grease pencil to write letters all over his face, including a big R that stood for retribution. He began committing vandalism, which caught Spider-Man's attention. Typeface would fight off the web slinger with giant letters. He then escaped, went back to his apartment, changed the R on his head to an A for annihilation, obviously, and decided to take revenge on the dude who was responsible for him being fired, a guy named George Finch. And Typeface actually ended up helping Spider-Man fight off another foe called Spider Hybrid. Except George Finch, the guy who got Typeface fired, was not cool with Typeface kicking around. He felt humiliated by the lowly villain and decided to use the bombs that Typeface had crafted to kill Gordon to kill Typeface. For a long time, it was believed that Typeface had died in an explosion caused by Finch, but he would later become a vigilante, waging a war with a small-time gang and leaving notes for the police inspired by the web slinger that read, "Compliments from your friendly neighborhood Typeface." Just doesn't quite have the same ring. And at 7, Slide. Slide has to be one of the most ridiculous Spider-Man villains out there. First appearing in the 1986 The Amazing Spider-Man issue 272, Slide is a dude named Jerome Teacher, a chemical engineer who created a non-stick coating that could be applied to literally anything. He was fired from his job, so he decided to use his invention for his own personal gain by robbing banks. He created a bodysuit that would let him slide around on any surface. While that does sound absolutely ridiculous, it did manage to elude Spider-Man briefly, since Peter's webs could not grab hold of him. And at 6,
coming in at number 10, we've got the Riddler. Of all the supervillains throughout the universe, the Riddler is one of the most consistently interesting. He's an excellent foil for Batman, you know, the world's greatest detective. By setting up intricate puzzles and riddles for Mr. Wayne to solve, he provides all sorts of intrigue. Edward Nygma, what a name by the way, isn't terribly physically strong, nor does he have any sort of energy beam ready to fire. He's just extremely good at deductive reasoning and is able to plan very far ahead using his vast knowledge of eclectic things. He could probably be a master criminal if he wanted to, pulling off heists like no other without ever coming close to being caught. Unfortunately, he has a major weakness. He wants people to solve his riddles. He wants to be found. He's compelled to leave clues behind, pretty much no matter what. There could be a clean getaway right in front of his masked face and he'd still find a way to leave behind some sort of tip for the folks looking to solve this crime. Really, anytime the Riddler loses, it's his own doing. You have to feel sort of bad for the guy at this point. I'm sure it was fun at first, but now he probably just wants to make a clean getaway and write some mystery novels or something. Maybe someday, Edward. Maybe someday. Coming in at number 9, we've got Thanos. Believe it or not, Thanos has a similar weakness to the Riddler. Sure, he's a gigantic purple powerhouse of a supervillain with a drove of committed lackeys that have crazy powers of their own, but he still fails in the same way as Mr. Nygma. Well, almost the same way. Throughout his various reigns, Thanos manages to take down countless heroes, even without the full power of the Infinity Gauntlet. He's got size, strength, speed, and mastery over all sorts of disciplines. Really, there's no reason for Thanos to fail at whatever he puts his mind to, but he still does somehow. It seems as though he believes that he's unworthy of his own power, therefore making subconscious mistakes and leaving openings for others to thwart his plans. So even if his weakness isn't apparent to those trying to bring him down, he'll lead them to victory somehow. Wow. Coming in at number 8, we've got the Penguin. Remember kids, smoking kills. The Penguin is another villain from the Batman universe who really doesn't have any superpowers per se. What he does have though is ruthless business sense, endless funds, and a whole lot of crazy technology. Plus he's based on a penguin. Incredible stuff really. His genius level intellect and surprising combat skills make him a formidable foe for sure, and that's not even counting his birds. But there's one thing that brings this flightless lad down. It's not an allergy to some sort of supernatural element, nor is it a proclivity for melting when exposed to heat. It's a self-inflicted wound. The Penguin has a weakness for cigarettes. That's right, death sticks, coffin nails. Didn't his mother tell him it was a terrible habit? I suppose he didn't like his parents too much to start with, but still, if there's one weakness that is extra terrible, it has to be one for smoking, even if it is through one of those fancy long-handled opera-style holders. Coming in at number 7, we've got Venom. Eddie Brock has had a rough go, hasn't he? The poor guy lost everything, decided to blame it on Spider-Man, and then got bonded with a symbiotic alien. Well, at least he got some wicked powers out of it. He's got all sorts of superhuman physical abilities, as well as the ability to block out Spidey's spider senses. Add in night vision, venomous fangs, and of course shape-shifting, and you've got a powerful villain slash anti-hero slash whatever else Venom decides to do. But alas, there are a couple of rough weaknesses that make this symbiote hunter a little less effective than he'd be otherwise. Firstly, there's the fact that fire, or really any form of intense heat, really does a number on him. Even a match could prove to be a little too much for poor Venom depending on the circumstances. Fire can be more or less avoided if you're careful though. His other weakness is a little more omnipresent. It's sound. Loud noises can take out the big lad. It really disturbs the alien. And Venom seems to operate largely in New York City, which isn't exactly known for ever being quiet. Tough break, big guy.
Number 10, Boggler. I mean, Boggler only lasted a few short years as a character and only lasted a few short issues on the Suicide Squad team, but she really should have been so much better than she was. Boggler's powers allowed her to control the minds of others and were so powerful that she could actually use them to get a target to do her bidding by making them basically hallucinate, creating illusions in their mind that made them believe they were doing one thing when in reality they were doing something completely different. Unfortunately, because she had humiliated Captain Boomerang in retaliation for him mistreating another member of the team, he let her get gunned down while on a mission, and then kind of just claimed after that he had simply arrived too late to help her. Rude. Man, Captain Boomerang can be pretty despicable, gotta say. Number 9, Captain Boomerang. To me, being classified as weak really just means unconventional or unique in terms of superhero or supervillain speak. It just means your skills are more specialized in usually a very niche area. With Captain Boomerang, that niche area is throwing things, often boomerangs. Captain Boomerang comes armed with various different kinds of boomerangs usually, but he doesn't really have any superpowers except being good at throwing boomerangs, which isn't really a superpower. At least initially in the comics, he doesn't have powers. I will admit that the second Captain Boomerang, Owen Mercer, the son of George Harkness, did seem to also display the ability to tap into the Speed Force, but it should also be acknowledged this likely comes from his relation to the Allen and Thawne family tree on his mother's side, not the OG Captain Boomerang side of the family, the Harkness side. Just FYI. Yeah, he's got some superpowers, but not so much on the original Captain Boomerang front. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed and you want me to talk more about cool Suicide Squad stuff, which I'm so down for. I'm wearing my shark sweater. I'm all ready for that King Shark Facts Part 2 list whenever you are. Number 8, Karen Grace. Karen was an original member of Task Force X and first appeared alongside the team in The Brave and the Bold. She was a love interest of Rick Flagg's and the two were in a relationship together, but their other teammates, Jess Bright and Hugh Evans, also had a thing for Karen, so Rick asked that she keep their relationship a secret to maintain the harmony of the team. In the end, their relationship was revealed, which did create a split in the team, and it resulted in the apparent death of both Hugh and Jess. Karen would continue on past her original appearance in Brave and the Bold, and would go on to appear as a team member in the original run of Suicide Squad out of the 80s. She was skilled in combat and espionage, and was the team's medic originally. She and Rick would have a son together, but she would later become resentful of Rick, and then join the Manhunters in secret, later betraying Rick, but then ultimately sacrificing herself in the end to save him, and double-crossing the Manhunters in the end there. Karen became more of a badass as time went on, but in the end, she was still a pretty squishy human. So, Yeah. Number 7, Plastique. Plastique has appeared a few times with the Suicide Squad as a team member. She is a Canadian extremist known for terrorizing nations. Plastique has attempted to blow up multiple places of import, including the Statue of Liberty in New York City and the Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa. Pretty much all of her attempts to cause harm to political leaders or monuments, though, have been thwarted and usually lead to her imprisonment, and later led to her recruitment onto the Suicide Squad. Plastique is one of those members who could be really cool, but is just always kind of set up to fall flat, allowing her to become more well known for failing than succeeding. Initially, she just had knowledge of explosives, but she was later given powers which allowed her to create explosive blasts on her own. I don't know what this is. I guess if I was gonna do an explosive blast, this would be my move for that as a power. Number 6, Okondo. Admittedly, Okondo's powers were actually pretty cool, but he didn't really last very long on the team. He first appeared in the 2018 Damage series in issue 1, and as a result of the failed mission he was part of, he ended up in a coma. Okondo's powers allowed him to mimic other animals and their abilities. Along with being able to do this, he also seemed to have knowledge of how best to utilize those abilities and which ones were best for certain situations. Although he didn't apparently know them well enough, it seems, to avoid ending up in a coma, unfortunately. So there's that. Poor Okondo. So many cool people that are short-lived, and then so many people that are mediocre that seem to go on forever in Suicide Squad. That's always interesting to me. Number 5, Jeff Bright. Originally named Jess Bright in the comics, though his name would change later on when he reappeared in the Suicide Squad series. As Jess Bright, he first appeared in The Brave and the Bold in issue 25, when he was first on the Suicide Squad. One of the strongest things about Jeff Bright was actually his connection to his partner, Hugh Evans. Both men were geniuses and best friends, and their bond and friendship often came in handy when dealing with foes as part of the original Task Force X team, aka the Suicide Squad. Ha ha ha. Jess and Hugh were both geniuses, and in the end both seemingly died on a mission after they were knocked off a cliff. However, Jess lived because he got lucky, and the Yeti that was falling with him kind of broke his fall. He would return in issue 50 as the vengeful and zombie-like Koshi the Deathless, but would ultimately be defeated by the current squad members.
Big Wheel. Okay, so yes, we did put Big Wheel on our list of villains too powerful for the MCU. And yes, we have also included him on this list of the villain's too weak for the MCU. Really, it's because he's a baffling and perplexing character. Big Wheel is a dude named Jackson Wheel, a businessman who embezzled money from the company he worked at. He was afraid of getting caught, so he hired another criminal, a dude who called himself Rocket Racer, to steal the evidence that could potentially incriminate him. But Rocket Racer, being the opportunist he was, took advantage of the situation and blackmailed Wheel with it. Jackson ended up trying to commit suicide because of it, but Rocket Racer prevents him from doing it. Being super humiliated, Wheel heads over to the Tinkerer, who he gets to build him a giant wheel that can climb up buildings, that has Waldo arms and a bunch of guns attached to it. Jackson then calls himself Big Wheel and hunts down Rocket Racer for revenge. Seeing a massive wheel rolling around the city firing off guns catches the attention of our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but before the web-slinger can even intervene, Jackson loses control of his wheel and drops into the Hudson River. Spider-Man has to save him, which he actually doesn't. Everyone just thinks Jackson is dead. Flash forward to 20 years later, turns out Jackson survived, and with his big wheel, he hunts down Spider-Man, informing the hero that he survived and ended up in jail for embezzlement. He was now working through the 12-step program, and one of his steps was to help Spider-Man. Out of pity, Spider-Man lets him follow him around for the day, but Jackson realizes that he is not cut out to be a hero. So instead, he decides he's just gonna use his big wheel and demolition derbies. I guess that's one way of making a living. And at number 5, Kangaroo. There have been 2 villains who have operated under the mantle of Kangaroo in Marvel Comics. The first is the one that lands a spot on this list though. He first debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 81 back in 1970, and his name was Frank Oliver, a fellow who was born in Sydney, Australia, who studied kangaroos, growing obsessed with them. He would eat, sleep, travel, and live amongst the kangaroos, and even developed the ability to leap like them, jumping at heights that rivaled their own. He decided to become a boxer with his newfound abilities, and during one match he severely injured his foe, and ended up facing criminal charges because of it. He fled to the US, where he was detained for not having a passport. Rather than deal with being deported, he fled yet again, embracing a life of crime, calling himself the Kangaroo. He got caught up in some business in which he stole a vial containing a deadly bacteria that Spider-Man had to take care of, while the Kangaroo was just kinda bummed about not stealing something more valuable. Later on, Dr. Jonas Harrow would augment Kangaroo with jets that enhance his leaping ability. vulnerabilities, along with popping an implant in his brain to control him. When the kangaroo fought Spider-Man, Dr. Harrow began to control him, forcing him to steal a radioactive isotope. Spider-Man warned him against doing it, but Kangaroo broke into the lab where it was located, only to be reduced to a pile of ashes upon being exposed to the isotope's radiation. So to sum up Kangaroo, he is an Australian cliche, he has no superpowers, did kinda get superpowers, but they were lame and then he died. In at number 4, Mindworm. Mindworm is a mutant character with an oversized cranium. He was naturally extremely intelligent, but he accidentally killed his mother through his unconscious vampiric psionic feeding. This caused his father to go into emotional shock, which ultimately led to his death. Suicide via running in front of a car. This was incredibly traumatic for Mindworm, aka William Turner, who loved both of his parents dearly. He also had no idea that he was the one responsible for that at that point in time. After his parents' death, he ended up in an orphanage where he was bullied and called Mindworm. When he grew up and got himself an apartment in New York City, he would secretly feed off of the emotions of his neighbors. Not enough to hurt them, but just enough to satiate himself. Spider-Man crossed paths with him when he had to move in with Flash Thompson, who lived nearby Turner. Peter was able to resist Mindworm's feeding to the extent that Mindworm actually attacked him physically because of it. Peter easily knocked him out and Mindworm was arrested. He would later seek vengeance but learned that Peter had lost his parents too and decided to turn to good. But it gets tragic from here on out. Mindworm would be taken advantage of by criminals wanting to use his abilities and eventually developed severe mental illnesses, to the point where he became homeless. Not wanting to injure others, he would often get beat up on the streets and was eventually killed by a street gang. Yikes. And at number 3, Hypno Hustler. Hypno Hustler is a dude named Antoine who first appeared in the comics in the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 24 in 1978. He was the lead singer of a band called the Mercy Killers. One night when the band was playing at a club called Beyond Forever, Hypno Hustler decided to get greedy and rob the club's safe. Club's manager catches him in the act, and what does our musically hustling friend do? He ends up using his hypnotic equipment on the manager. He likes the effects of it so much that when he and the band play the show, he uses his hypnotizing equipment on the audience as a means to rob them as well. Peter Parker just so happens to be at the club at the time, and ends up changing into his Spider-Man costume to stop them. He removes Hypno Hustler's headphones, causing the villain to be a victim of his own hypnosis, which is pretty darn hilarious. He appeared a few other times after that, briefly, but his claim to fame really was just failing hard. Moving on to number 2, Plant Man. Plant Man is kind of like the dollar store knockoff of DC's Poison Ivy, created in 1963 and debuting in Strange Tales Volume 1 issue 113. He's actually a villain who has crossed paths with many Marvel heavy hitters. Plant Man, aka Samuel Smithers, was a botanist who developed a device that could communicate with plants, something that got him laughed out of the scientific community. During a freak lightning storm, his plant ray gun was transformed into a tool that could control and animate plant life. He then fought against the Human Torch, Iron Man, the Defenders, the list goes on. But he was always sort of a one-off kind of villain. He can create plant simuloids of himself, which are plant clones of sorts that he can use for mercenary endeavors. In Marvel Team Up issue 71, he would finally cross paths with Spider-Man alongside Falcon, with the duo discovering an exotic plant breeding nursery where they took on one of his simuloids. He's defeated when Falcon's winged pal swoops in and grabs his plant ray gun, making him defenseless. Then another time when Spider-Man and Power Man Luke Cage encountered the villain, he threw coconuts at them. So yeah, kinda seems like he might not be the right kind of stuff for the MCU. And finally, in at number 1, Humbug. Described on the cover of his debut issue as the most offbeat Spidey villain yet, Humbug was so bad at being a villain that he later became a superhero and then a member of Heroes for Hire. First hitting the scene in 1986's Web of Spider-Man issue 19, the character, also known as Buck Mitty, was an entomology professor at Empire State University. His funding was cut off, and desperate to fight for the value of his research on the insect world, he ended up designing his Humbug costume in order to steal to provide money for his research. He was wildly unprepared when it came to actually carrying out his robberies though, and Spider-Man foiled his plans, turning his powers back onto him, which landed him in jail. When he got out, he tried it again and fell out of a window. Yeah, Spider-Man had to save him, but Humbug got away by blowing up some cars. Talk about ungrateful. Spider-Man was able to track him down to his lab where he had taken a woman hostage. In order to have Mitty free the hostage, Spider-Man grabbed a jar containing some of Mitty's specimens, a jar of cockroaches, which he then declared to the villain, I quote, "Let the girl go, Humbug, or these roaches die screaming." Humbug would return after that too, with Spider-Man stopping him from stealing a rare scarab amulet from a museum, and Deadpool got involved, dousing Mitty in honey and throwing a jar of South American fire ants at him, which almost killed him, until Mitty communicated with the ants and made them a deal, the ants having already eaten off the outer layer of his skin. All in all, Really incompetent villain.
Coming in at number 6, we've got Electro. Spider-Man, you've got it too easy. All your enemies have weaknesses that are super exploitable. You'd think that a man who can harness the power of electricity would do well, especially in a big city, but it seems as though his spirits are easily dampened. Get it? Hold on. So Electro can generate all sorts of electricity, which is extremely useful when he weaponizes it. He can also propel himself along with electromagnetic energy and even teleport by turning himself into electric current and jumping into wires. That all sounds super great, right? Like, it's nice to be Electro, but it's too bad that water can essentially stop him in his sparky tracks. There's the old idea that electricity will travel quickly through water, electrocuting anyone in contact with the liquid. Well, I mean, when it comes to Electro, water will just short circuit him. Womp womp. This wouldn't be too big of an issue, but Electro lives on Earth, you know, the planet covered in water. Coming in at number 5, we've got Red Hulk. After a lifetime of hunting the Hulk, General Thunderbolt Ross decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. His own red hands. Assisted by AIM and the intelligentsia, he becomes a Hulk of his very own, this time more crimson than green, and then he sets out to find and fight the Hulk. The more power he draws, the hotter he gets though, so as he goes harder in the paint, the more likely he is to overheat, and if that happens, it's game over. I suppose that's a weakness most people have. If you fight too hard, you're gonna pass out, but the Red Hulk takes it to a brand new extreme. Coming in at number 4, we've got MODOK. This one might seem obvious, but it's worth mentioning. MODOK, or a mental organism designed only for killing, was once an ordinary man. George Tarleton was a skilled technician who ended up joining AIM. He knew they were a little radical, but not to the extent that he found out later on. The organization altered George into a super intelligent being, which made his dome grow to unheard of sizes, and then realized they should probably give him a way to move around. Thus, the Doomsday Chair was born, carting MODOK around by levitating. He would think circles around everyone, using his brilliant mind, and even had psionic powers, but if he's rendered chairless, it's game over. Or if someone turns his power off. Coming in at number 3, we've got Harley Quinn. Another genius with an Achilles heel, but Harley's really has nothing to do with her own limitations. She's just a sucker for love. Or manipulation if you look at it objectively. The Joker, while serving time on Arkham, managed to brainwash poor Dr. Quinn. He broke her down and built her back up in his image. She's super smart, super resourceful, and super popular, but she's always got this thorn in her side, Mr. J. When your weakness is an over-dependent relationship with a gaslighting lunatic clown man, you know you've got it rough. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Joker. Speaking of lunatic clown men, wow, who would have guessed? The trickster of Gotham, the prince of pranks, the maniac who causes a lot of problems for everyone. He manages to outsmart and outplay all sorts of powerful folks through sheer ingenuity and madness. Because beyond all those crazy gadgets and brainwashed lackeys, the Joker is just a man. And men are weak to bullets, or knives, or being punched through the chest. Finally at number 1, we've got Kingpin. And speaking of men, Kingpin loves his wife a lot. Like, enough to make some major mistakes. She does not approve of his criminal lifestyle, but finds herself involved anyways. So when you look to all of the other villains with tragic backstories and Achilles heels the size of Achilles himself, you have to wonder how Kingpin feels. Ask him about his weakness and he'll respond, "My wife."
Number 4, Beast. But only because he died. Beast was a member of the so-called original Suicide Squad mentioned in Ostrander's run that was apparently from the days of World War II. This original squad was sent on a mission to retrieve a tank, but it turned out what they were really there for was an atomic bomb. What? Beast was the member of the squad who agreed to stay behind to ensure that the rest of the team could escape, which was actually very brave of him. Unfortunately, he got gunned down and he died. It's believed, like many of the rest of the original team, that he was mostly like a normal human. His story and fateful end is mentioned in issue 26 of the original Suicide Squad series from the 80s, when Rick Flag remembers the stories that his father, Rick Flag Sr., and his uncle Jeb used to tell him about their time together on the squad. Jeb Stewart wasn't really his uncle though, he was his godfather. Facts. Number 3, Ragdoll. We talked about specific abilities before, but this one was very weirdly specific. Ragdoll was Peter Merkel Jr. and is a legacy name actually, Ragdoll, meaning that Peter Jr. wasn't the first to use it and perhaps won't even be the last to use it. Ragdoll's main thing was being a contortionist, and their MO tended to be eliminating their victims by strangling them with their own contorted limbs, which is just so bizarrely specific. They also fought with daggers though, but neither of their skills was able to save them from a bunch of ghoul-like creatures who were stalking the squad's target. Ragdoll ended up torn to shreds and ripped limb from limb by the ghouls in the 2018 Suicide Squad Annual, which is from the 2016 series but happened in 2018. That was the year it came out. Just in case anyone's like, that was from the 2016 series. I know. If you're looking for it, it might be easier for you to look up. Actually, maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it would be easier for you to look up just 2016 Annual 1. I don't know. What helps you all find comics when I give you information? Let me know, and I'll give it to you. Do you like volume numbers? Do you like years? Do you like the year it came out? The year of the series it was part of? So many questions. Number 2, Scorpio. Scorpio was a villain originally introduced in Steel in the New Earth continuity. However, he resurfaced in the current continuity only to be sacrificed as a member of the Suicide Squad team. Scorpio ended up on the team alongside our previous number that was mentioned, Ragdoll. While Ragdoll was first to die, Scorpio wasn't far behind him. And their death, in my opinion, was more humiliating simply because they were boasting the entire time of like how scary they were, only to find themselves drowned in what appeared to be a very shallow marsh. That's what it looked like happened. Scorpio even claimed to be more frightening than Swamp Thing. I feel like you don't make a bold claim like that and live to see it through usually, unless you are actually more scary than Swamp Thing. Scorpio was also killed by the ghouls that kept appearing near the initial target of the squad that we talked about in the previous point. Number 1, Slipknot. He's got sticky ropes. Sorry, sticky ropes that can also harden. I mean, this just sounds like some weird, dirty thing. Like, I feel like whoever wrote this, I don't know what they were thinking about these sticky ropes that can harden. Yikes. Anyways, if you don't like sticky ropes, you better watch out. Not only did Slipknot get the most unceremonious death in the Suicide Squad film from 2016, but even in the comics, he's honestly pretty lame. I'm actually surprised he lasted as long as he did. He was on the team for a short period, but wouldn't have an on-panel death until 2010 in the comics, though he didn't die in an issue of Suicide Squad, by the way. He was encouraged by Captain Boomerang during his time on the squad to try and escape, and as a result, he had his arm blown off. He suffered a worse fate in the film, though. He had more than his arm blown off. Pop.